This has been great. It's wild. I could actually just go back and talk about every episode like this. It's just really fun.
Welcome to the Culture GOODR podcast, a behind the shades look at creating and changing culture inside of GOODR sunglasses.
Welcome back to the Culture GOODR podcast. This is a special episode because it is our 100th episode. 100 episodes in. How does it feel?
It feels like this, man, I don't even know how it feels. It feels shocking that we did 100 episodes. It also feels like yesterday.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
I don't know. It's all the things.
Totally. I don't know what we were planning when we first started planning this thing, but it feels like the journey that we've had wasn't the journey we thought was ahead of us for sure.
Yeah, it didn't. Starting this podcast didn't necessarily go where I was expecting, but it went where we needed it to.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so today, since it's our 100th episode, we've got a bit of a special theme and approach. We've taken the top 10 episodes by listenership and pulled a lesson out of each one of those. The first one we've got is from episode 74 with Seth Godin, which is all about defining culture. And so cool that we got to have Seth Godin on the podcast. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, Seth Godin is... the first time I ever met him was on the podcast. Mm-hmm. And, he's a mentor of mine that I've never met. I've read all of his books. It was pretty surreal. I mean, I remember the first book I ever read of Seth Godin's was Tribes. Right after Tribes, I read Purple Cow. Right after Purple Cow, I read Lynchpin. I would go on long runs and just listen to audiobooks, and really, really impacted how I thought about our customers, marketing, what it means to lead by example and be indispensable at work. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was a very, very surreal experience that it got to happen. Leading up to it was surreal. In the moment, it was fun, and I think also Seth's just a fucking pro. Yeah. I mean, two things I'll pull out. One is we were having some technical difficulties behind the scenes, and we use a thing called Riverside to record, and Seth just knew. He's like, no, you're gonna need to go here. You need to go here. He's like talking our tech person through it. I'm like, oh, all right. And then I would ask Seth a question, and he would just reach into his mind, pull out a story that was perfectly to the point, and tell the story, and then stop. I call this guy's fucking legend.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
It's one of those, like, they say don't meet your heroes, but you made him be like, wow, even cooler than I thought.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure on certain circumstances you shouldn't meet your heroes, but I'm really glad I got to meet Seth Godin.
Yeah, right, definitely. Well, so the quote that I pulled from this episode was a way that he defines culture, which is...
I define culture as the way things are around here. People like us do things like this. And culture in an organization defeats strategy every time. That we can find organizations that had a great strategy, but if the culture didn't support 1,000 little decisions every day, they fell apart. And we destroy the culture when we make a compromise for profit. So when there's a sales rep who's a bully and we don't take action because, they're getting their numbers, well, you've just sent a message to every single person in the organization. What are things like around here? That's what culture is.
So how did that land with you?
Oh, I've obviously heard it before. I mean, one of the reasons I believe so much in investing in our culture is because culture will absolutely eat strategy for breakfast any fucking day of the week. Mm-hmm. And so, it's great to hear it from the man himself. And I do absolutely believe it. A lot of the episode was learning insights, and then also confirmation on the stuff we're doing is it heading the right direction and really impactful.
Yeah, definitely. Anything that comes to mind from that conversation where you were like, either, yeah, totally so glad we're doing it that way, or like hadn't thought about it like that. Let's move in that direction.
We went on I went on a riff on like managers versus leaders, and like, here's what a manager is, here's what a leader is. And it says all about it. Like, all right, Seth liked it. Wow.
Yes.
Got one. And then also, we talked about meetings. He's was just releasing a book kind of about culture, but about meetings. And I talked through how we don't allow meetings on Wednesday and Friday, and so on and so forth. And so there was confirmation there and some knowledge gain. But yeah, those are the two things that stick out.
Awesome. Right on. Well, our next one from episode 66 was another hero, Dan Pink. Holy shit. Two for two on the guest list there. But he had written the book Drive, which is ultimately what sparked you to create AMP, which is our review system, right? Autonomy, Mastery, Purpose. So what was it like being on the podcast with him?
Yeah, I mean, very similar in a sense that Dan Pink, mentor of mine that I never met. Mm-hmm. Dan was actually the first of, we did Liz Wiseman and Seth Godin. So Dan was like the first kind of like big author we had from the outside. So that was a very, very, very special. Mm-hmm. And he wrote a book called Drive that is what we built back in 2018. We built AMP off of, which is our performance review system. Mm-hmm. And so hugely impactful in our culture. Like Seth Godin's like hugely impactful for me, and I've taken things into the culture, but like you can just pull a through line from like Dan Pink's work into our brand. So that was really, really cool just to kind of have that touch point and share what we share, like how we've used his work. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's all about motivation, right? Becoming intrinsically motivated. If you feel like you have autonomy in your role, you feel like you're learning something that matters, you're mastering some skill, and then you have purpose in your work. I think one of the coolest revelations happened while you were kind of explaining to him how we had incorporated that into our system. Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, I mean, I walked him through AMP and actually got asked him to poke holes in it because, when you have these experts on, it's advantageous for you to share stuff and let them critique you. Like actually, so the critique's actually better than just agreeing with you. One thing that's interesting is, we have 10% time, so for the purpose part. And what's crazy, some people fall in love with it. They start nonprofits, they go down this rabbit hole. But I would say maybe 25% of the top performers actually really struggle in this like purpose project, doing things.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, it could be a bunch of things. I mean, I think that for purpose doesn't necessarily have to express itself in a side project. It could simply be that people are finding purpose in the job itself. And for many people, that's enough. And again, remember, don't forget about the autonomy part of that. You want these things to be freely chosen. And so someone saying, "Oh crap, I got to start a nonprofit," or I got to, that's not gonna do you or them a lot of good.
I couldn't have said it how he said it. Mm-hmm. I needed him to do it. I felt a version of what like the essence of it, and so it was awesome. I was like, well, how to change all this shit? But it's worked out for the better.
Absolutely. And how rad to have the author himself of the thing we built the system from help to guide the shaping of the system, right?
For sure. And I think that in a lot of ways, it's actually great never talk to him about it until we've been this far into it, because we were allowed to, grow, evolve it. And yeah, I think we've learned so many lessons. It was the appropriate time to have feedback to change it.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing he said that I thought was really cool, he kind of honed in on like the simplicity of a mission statement to guide behavior, but he said use managers as coaches rather than monitors, right? And that's just a cool shift for the way that leadership can impact the company in a positive way.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that word coach is very, very important as a leader. So I love that. I also I asked him a question about, rules for culture, how do you advise? And he said something to the effect of, well, one of the things he said was, I would have a firm no asshole policy. Mm-hmm. Like, I would not allow assholes at my company. And so that's really, we give you permission to be unabashed yourself unless you're an asshole. And at GOODR, we do not allow assholes inside the building. We weed them out early and often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's another good little, already kind of tied into the mission statement, but nice to have confirmation kind of thing.
For sure.
Yeah, nice.
How many times have you started a blog, a new hobby, an exercise routine, or had an idea for a business just to lose interest or crash and burn after a month? For me, it's been a lot. The hardest thing about creating vision and achieving big goals isn't the idea. It isn't the goal. That's actually pretty easy. It's at the end. It's not even where to begin. It's creating a plan with systems and processes to keep you motivated and on track. At the very end of 2021, I set the goal to run a 50K ultramarathon because I hadn't run one in a few years and I really missed long distance running. So vision, ultramarathoner, check. Goal, 50K, check. Where to begin? 5-mile training run next Monday, check. As you can see, vision, goal, where to begin is easy. Then what? Well, for me, I'm a systems thinker. And so when I'm making a plan to do anything long-term, big vision, like run a 50K, I take a step back and I ask myself, what are the things that would get in the way of me accomplishing that goal? For this, it was 3 things: time, decision fatigue, and motivation. So for time, I reviewed my calendar and time blocked all my runs for 4 months. For decision fatigue, I planned out every long run. So when I wake up Saturday and I'm exhausted, I already know where the run is, so I don't have to make a decision. And then motivation. For this, I've recruited friends who are runners to run with me, so I had accountability, so I showed up every Saturday and couldn't miss one. Flash forward 4 months later, 50K, done and dusted. You got a vision, you got big goals, you want to know how to achieve them? Let's talk about it.
All right. So our third lesson comes from our Celebrating the Work Over the Results episode, which is number 50, Planning for the Future with Imagination and Wisdom. So the lesson there is that celebrating the work over the results can create a culture that's focused on process, right? Rather than always just the end results of things. How do you feel that has been effective for us at GOODR?
Yeah, I mean, we have our 2 core values of fun and authenticity, and we define fun as celebrating the work over the results. Mm-hmm. And I started talking about this early on, probably 2000 into 18, 19, but I realized, people were thinking we're a party company, we're taking a party for fun. Mm-hmm. And I had to go through and define, like, hey, here's what we mean by fun. And the analogy I always use is at a marathon. We start training for a marathon 6 months in the future. You're running 8 miles on Saturday, then 10, then 12, then 15, then 18, then 20, then 22. You're doing speed work on Tuesdays, tempo runs. You're doing all this work so that for one day, 6 months in the future, you're going to spend 4 hours and you are going to be proud of the work you did. You're going to beat your chest because you celebrated the work over the results. Because the whole idea of anything is the journey is everything. That's the journey is what's important, because on race day, it's over.
Right.
And at GOODR, people who are working for, if you want an office in a corner with a secretary and your own parking spot, that is awesome. That is results oriented. That's not loving what you do. Mm-hmm. And so for us, we always are going back to whether it's an AMP, anything, making sure people love the work they do. And yeah, so practice is at the core of just enjoying the practice of your job. I know it's very ingrained in our culture.
Absolutely. That reminds me of one of my favorite ideas from Alan Watts, who says the point of dancing isn't to arrive at a particular part on the floor, and the point of a song isn't to get to the end of the song, right? Otherwise music would just be one big crescendo. It's the journey is the point, and if you're not enjoying that, the whole thing's going to suck. Yeah,
you spend so much time working, and it doesn't always have to be easy, but you should enjoy. You should enjoy the challenge. And, for us, it's really, really, really important. And I think in this celebrating the work of results, it is important to be goal-oriented. It is important to have a North Star, right? That's to move you along, but that's not to take you away from the today.
Yeah, absolutely. Any quick hits on just how we celebrate the work?
Oh man, I wasn't ready for that question. How do we celebrate the work, Sean?
Well, I mean, a couple of things come to mind. Even just the end of the year, we've got our Flamingo Awards Gala, right? We recognize exceptional, awe-inspiring work and exceptional failure, like a thing you took a big swing at and then missed, and there's a flock up belt for that, right? So even that right there is saying whether it worked or didn't work, we're happy that you did it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I would go micro in the sense of people. I believe most people at GOODR love doing really, really good work, and you just see it in the work product. You see it when people show up to present, and celebrating all types of work, whether it's a really cool Excel pivot table, a new product marketing. I mean, I don't know. I think that we do a really good job of just really valuing all the work people do in their day to day.
Yeah, totally. It's like even from, figuring out how to make shipping more cost effective is just as cool as like a new marketing campaign, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
for sure.
Nice. All right. So our next lesson comes from our episode on embracing change. This is episode 60. This one we actually had Kelly, who's in charge of, she's now the first
CMO.
herder, right? Yeah. CMO. Easy. How do we say that in a way that everyone can understand?
One of our coworkers shared a picture with me of me basically taking a call in a closet, and it just made me really nostalgic for that time. It was really, really fun.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I'm have a biased view because GOODR is obviously my baby, but I like hearing other people's point of view because there was for sure some hard grind elements, but everything I remember is like I have fond memories only.
Absolutely. They were great times, and these are great times too. And it's just a reminder to be present in these moments because it's going to look completely different a month from now and a year from now. So it's a great reminder to enjoy the moment.
Yeah, whenever, I mean, the only constant at GOODR is change.
Mm-hmm.
of like, oh, you haven't been here long enough. You don't know. This is once a year, we just change everything completely.
So that was kind of focused on acknowledging that the only constant is change. So we can prepare to adapt quickly and effectively to get somewhere new, right? Kind of leaning into that NASA mindset. So can you talk us through a little bit of that?
Yeah. Our previous episode, we talked about how to evolve your culture appropriately. And at GOODR, like legit, the only constant probably is change. I will jerk the wheel. I will turn the Titanic 90 degrees if that's what's needed. And I think that most companies get super complacent. They let like the concrete dry, and I have no interest in doing that. And so we change really quite a bit from how internal processes, what's needed, what's our focus. Uncomfortably so for people. I think that the longer you're here, do you think the longer people are here, the more they get used to it?
Well, yeah, definitely. It's jarring at first.
Yeah. Do you remember for your first jarring experience of like when we changed something?
Yeah, I'm trying. Nothing comes to mind, but I know the feeling of being like, oh, okay. Oh yeah. You know what it was? Easy one. We had the 8 pillars for mastery, right? And we were both like, this is too many. Let's trash it.
Too many.
Let's pick 3. And it's like, okay, well, we can kind of build a lot of stuff around 8. So I guess that's all going to change immediately. But ultimately it's for the best, right? Like the change happens to make something scale better, to make it simpler, to make it more functional. It's not random.
It's not random. I think we fall into sunk cost fallacy, right? Where it's like, oh, well, I did all this work on the pillars. It's like, yeah, but if you're celebrating the work over the results, you got your reward there. You got the work. And so you just see what I did there. I but hey, change is okay if you're celebrating the work over the results.
Exactly right. Two at once, tie them together, beautifully done. Nice. All right. So our next one is from episode 59, which is Culture as a Practice. This one had Nicole, our chief of people, in there.
I think culture is the way you do your work. It's not the fun stuff.
Yeah.
It's not the pizza parties after work. It's how your company has agreed to do the work.
Yeah.
It's the values, it's the behaviors, it's in the little things. That's where your culture is.
So what are some of those daily practices that we have in place at GOODR that help to bring our culture to life?
Man, I mean, there's simple things like we start in meetings on time. Mm-hmm. That is, once you know that, you're like, okay, that's something different.
Yep.
How people present, like presentations here, everybody, it's just like clean, crisp. We teach people how to make presentations. We make sure people show up dialed. Mm-hmm. Like that's a really tiny thing. When you see our marketing campaigns, man, people are coming with some wild shit always. And that's just in our culture is doing really absurd things. So you kind of you see that show up. You see it when we, oh man, what else? What comes to mind for you?
you know what? Doing to done. Having the whole company on the same productivity system, running weekly reviews, daily reviews, taking next actions. It's just it's so pervasive that it feels like it's like too obvious to notice anymore. But man, the amount of things we get done as a result are incredible.
Yeah, right. We don't allow internal email. It's Slack only. That's a practice. We, have any number of things from our staff meetings every month. We have a Tuesday that's marked off that we do working sessions called Fuck to Fixed. There's so many that we just lose count of them.
Yeah, mission control, presenting things to everyone who needs to know about them early.
Yeah, and even just you walk in the building and the design, the aesthetic, and how there's constant little cool details that somebody had to do the work to make that happen.
Yeah.
And when you realize that, you're like, oh, wow, okay, there's a practice of details and professionalism. And even from the poles in our office, that the bottom looks like flamingo feet.
Yeah.
There's care taken to make sure, I always joke that I'm serious. We take having fun very seriously. And you just feel that everywhere.
Absolutely. Well, when everyone cares and wants to do their best, that's the bar, right? And from there, we actually keep raising the bar on each other, which is in some ways like pretty intense, but it's also really fun because amazing things happen when we set the bar that high.
For sure.
Totally.
How do I balance between being mean to myself versus being hard on myself? And in what situations is it serving versus not serving? Right? Because hey, if I'm getting on stage to perform a talk in front of a couple hundred people, I'm going to be hard on myself. Because I'm not going to get up on that stage and be unprepared. There is just an eternal balancing act, and I don't have a good answer for how to figure that out, but I think that is the nuance of being a emotionally intelligent person or emotionally professional person, is understanding, when do you need to be hard on yourself and when it's serving you and when you do not.
So lesson 6 is all about feedback and improvement. This is from episode 55, which we called Self-Awareness as a Practice. Key lesson there obviously is in the title, but getting feedback is a key to improvement and growth, and we want to train people into it rather than out of it, right? So what are some of the ways that we approach feedback at GOODR?
Right. I mean, maybe you walk people through, how is it covered in onboarding? Because you know this off the top of your head.
Absolutely. Well, we teach a couple of different things. One is a clearing exercise, so people can communicate something difficult in a skillful way. And that's about starting with facts, owning your feelings, sharing your role in something, and then expressing what you want to see change. That works for communicating anything or crafting an email or a Slack. The next thing is we have a formula for feedback. We call it CORN. So that's context, observation, result, and next action. So that gives you a way to frame feedback and then ask for something to shift. It also works for praise equally well. And then the final thing is when someone is giving you feedback, the way to receive it is with curiosity and appreciation, whether they deliver it in the most poorly, unskillful way possible. If you have the mindset of curiosity, you're going to drop your defenses, you're going to ask questions and look to understand, okay, they're not doing this to be a jerk, right? They're just telling me something. What is it that I can hear? How can I improve? And then saying, thank you. I'm sure that was hard to say or whatever, right? Because we want to train each other into giving us feedback, sharing what they see, instead of being like, oh, they're not going to listen to me, so I'm not going to bother.
So everything Sean said from the beginning, we're teaching it. And then, as it stacks up, a lot of transparency in different meetings, context. Also, you have one-on-ones with your leaders every month, and feedback if needed is expected in there. Every trimester we have AMP. So the feedback that you've been given all along stacks up to your trimesterly reviews where you self-evaluate and your leader evaluates. And it's like where I get 99% or 100%, everybody's aligned because we teach it, we create a practice regularly, and we set the expectation that if the first time you're hearing critical feedback is in your trimesterly review, that is a fault of your leader. And
Correct.
So we put the ownership on them. So it's a nice ecosystem we've created.
Totally. I think last thing there that's really helpful for the check-ins is always asking an open-ended question rather than like, how can I improve or how am I doing? It's like, what do you see that I'm not seeing? Or, what have you noticed about how I could run a meeting better? Like something that you're really forcing the thoughtful answer rather than a like, you're doing great, keep going. You know?
Yeah. Specificity is really important when seeking feedback.
For sure.
I got invited to do a talk at LMU earlier this year. Now, I can show up and retread an old marketing or culture talk any day of the week. But whenever I get invited to do a new talk, I'm invested in creating value for the audience. They're giving me their most valuable, unrenewable resource, which is time. So I want to show up like a pro. I asked my assistant Hannah, who had recently graduated from college, what would she have liked to hear from a talk last year when she was in school? And she said these 3 things: uncertainty, how to live with it; perseverance, how to learn it; and purpose, how to live it. I said, that's great, so that's what I'll cover. I focused the talk on purpose, how to live it, and really this idea of celebrating the work over the results, which I talk about all the time. If your purpose is to love your work and celebrate it, then every day you get to work is a gift. The hilarious thing about this talk was I was getting ready to walk on stage. It was an auditorium of 300 people. I was expecting it to be full, but only 30 people showed up, which I understand because when I was in college, this was probably the last thing I would have done on a Tuesday night. And I laughed to myself because I'm walking on stage getting ready to talk about celebrating the work or the results. And I'm really glad that I do because that place was empty. If I didn't celebrate the work or the results, it would have been a miserable time and I wouldn't have been living to authenticity. I could have cared less. The reality was the people that were there loved it and they told me so. And that's all that matters. At GOODR, one of our strategic anchors is our people and our culture. And our culture is designed to get everyone here to celebrate the work over the results. Let's talk about it.
Lesson 7, preparation and practice. I think this falls under the bucket of professionalism. This is like, investing time in preparing, making sure, you're sharpening the axe before you try to cut down the tree, whatever it is. You want to show up dialed. And that brings with it a lot of confidence, the ability to be present. Can you just share like how you approach preparation for things and what that means to you in the end?
Oh man, I love building a talk or a presentation more than delivering it. Like getting on stage is the cherry on top, but so for me, I want to lead by example, want professionalism here, and I want people to show up always prepared. Mm-hmm. Especially, there's a lot of people here doing a lot of work, and you showing up unprepared to a meeting is you are wasting everybody's time. You are in fact that is extremely unprofessional because you didn't want to prepare. So for me, I think that's really, really important. For me, I have a process that I don't necessarily even think we have the time for me to talk through, but at the highest level, it is, all right, I'm preparing for said big project. I take 3 hours usually at the very, to start, and I do a version of the natural planning model from doing it done, but I dump everything out of my brain. I start sorting it, and then I am a very linear person. I create an outline and I just slog through everything. It's not sexy, but it is how I prepare. And if I'm going to be presenting on stage, depending on the level, I will spend whatever time is needed to run that through. And when I say whatever time is needed, I mean whatever time is needed. And sometimes, you can get it in 5 reps. Sometimes it takes 50 reps. And yes, I've done both.
Yeah. And I've heard you even say, I worked for hours on this talk and then I scrapped it and then I started over and here we are, right? That's part of the work too.
I've probably thrown away more work than I've presented.
Yeah. That's for the best. We want to see the thing that ended up at the final point, right?
I send out looms all the time. And this morning I was giving feedback on a project. The amount of times I look over, I'm like, this is an 8-minute loom. I'm rambling off. Delete. Gonna do it in 3 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
That first one was so you could get to that second one.
Yeah. Sometimes this morning get to me 3 times on a couple.
Yeah. It's like my friend Mikhail says, sometimes you just got to lay that first pancake.
That's right.
Nice.
Here's a paraphrased conversation that happened recently in my office. Them. Do you have a few minutes? I fucked something up and need to tell you about it. Me. Sit down. Them. I fucked up blank. Blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry. Blah, blah, blah. Here's how I'm fixing it. Me. Thanks for telling me. This conversation's gonna be so much easier because you took ownership. Blah, 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 blah. Have a great day. In a lot of organizations, people hide mistakes, but not at GOODR. It's not uncommon for someone to walk into my office or up to their boss and start a conversation by saying, I funked something up and need to tell you about it. I love when this happens because the second a person takes ownership, they create a major connection point between the two of us. And the second I respond in a calm, curious way, I create connection back. Now imagine a different scenario where I hear about an issue and I have to go find a person to ask what's going on. In that moment, that person drives a wedge between us instead of connecting us. Or imagine a third scenario where a person shows up to my office, takes ownership, and I act like a prick and go off the rails. In that moment, I drove a wedge between us and I made it very likely that person will never show up and ask to take ownership ever again. Connection is not created by one big party every year. Connection is created in thousands of continuous small moments in multiple ways all the time. We define connection at GOODR as engaging with others in a meaningful way. Let's talk about it.
All right. So lesson 8 is about the importance of connections, appropriately titled Creating Meaningful Connections from episode 52. This is about the importance of connecting with each other, right? Maintaining our connections inside and outside the organization, and the role of building relationships in a strong culture. So this is something that we focus on even from connection calls, right? Every single person at the company has spoken to everyone else and just kind of had a little get to know you, all the way up to our trimesterly connection events that we do on purpose. But can you just talk a little bit about how important connection is to you and to building our culture?
Yeah, I think that going back to how much time we spend with each other, I like people to like the people they work with, to understand the people they work with. That's important. And one thing that I realized later on in the culture, maybe a few years ago, this wasn't a master design, but this thing that we created where everybody goes to TWC, which is our staff meeting, so they get to experience that. So we all have that in common that week or that day. Once a trimester, we're all doing AMP the same week. So we're all doing our quarterly or trimester reviews that same week. We all are going to GOODR Stock and we get to experience it. There are so many things like that create connection and bond us. If you work fully remote, you have none of that, right? If you work at a company and there's not these intentional, like big zeitgeist company gatherings regularly, you don't have these connection points unless you work on the same team or the same project with a person. And so I think some of the magic that we've created is these big, tentpole moments that we continuously do throughout the year really helps to drive connection. Absolutely. And even the Tuesdays and Thursdays are in office so that we can connect in person. The work there is essentially meetings, right? It's like you're probably not going to get a lot of deep work on Tuesday, Thursday, but that's what the rest of the week is for. I've heard several people talk about how their company, went fully remote, then they took forever to come back, and then now you have to be in the office 1 day a week, but it's not uniformed, and so you go to an office and it's fucking empty, and I'm like, what? What? This is not that hard. Just make everybody show up on the same day. Right. Make the point of being there connection. Yeah. It's not to keep the office from getting dusty. It's to keep the relationships from getting rusty. Yes. Yeah. Nice.
One of the biggest dangers from any new company is hiring too many people too fast. We laid 9 people off during the pandemic. That was one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do. It was something I just was not even in my purview because we were growing so quickly. And so we really manage our headcount. So we don't want to hire people too early. We want to hire them just a little late. We want to make sure we need them. And I know that puts a little bit of stress on the team, but it's really better than the alternative, which is hiring like assholes and having to lay people off because you didn't do your job.
All right. So lesson 9 is all about challenging the status quo. If you want to check out the episode, it's 56. But this one is about how we evolve our ecosystem in particular. But I think the lesson of challenging the status quo can be summarized as taking something from typical and making it remarkable. Can you just give us some thoughts on how you came to that as a definition and how this mindset has served us over the years?
Yeah, our prime strategy as a brand is challenging the status quo. It's something why we are here. We started with product. We took typical running sunglasses were ugly, expensive, and over-engineered. And we made ours fashionable, affordable, and performance without the extra bullshit. So right there, boom, typical to remarkable.
Yeah.
As we get into marketing, in 2017, the Reverend brand you see today started to come alive with our content. Just typical content was lame, safe, and super predictable. And we made ours absurd, irreverent, and content that stands out. Boom. We took something typical, made it remarkable. Mm-hmm. We do that with operations. We do it with our culture, so on and so forth. And so I believe this to my core, so much so that the book I'm writing about is on challenging the status quo.
Yeah.
That is how we got to where we are. And we just have this, now it's so baked into our DNA where we, what's funny, we just talked about change on a previous episode, but we actually didn't, like if you want to challenge the status quo, you actually just have to be comfortable with change. That is by definition what it is. And so it's who we are, and it's something I'm just really proud of and really into.
Definitely. And knowing what the status quo is allows you to see what challenging it could look like, right? You can see what remarkable might be when you look at what typical is, even if typical was remarkable a year ago, right?
Yeah. It's to a point in my life where my brain is, I'm like, oh, that's all the typical stuff. I'm ciphering typical to remarkable just constantly.
Just at the baseline level.
Yeah. Sure. My partner Sarah's like, please stop.
She's like, can we just status quo for a little while?
That'd be nice. Chill out, man.
All right. Well, so lesson 10, gotta say, this is probably not our most popular episode, but I had to include it. Episode 1, where COVID trashed the podcast.
We were both super excited to launch this podcast for a lot of reasons. One of the main ones being, whenever I go to speaking engagements and I do Q&As, they always run over and people want to know more and more about our culture. And season 1 was going to be behind the scenes look at our culture. Now that will actually be season 2. And after COVID hit and the planning for this, we realized that the best thing we could do is probably talk about COVID, and not to mention be really tone deaf not to. And so March 22nd, I think it was a Sunday, and I had the idea of, well, season 1's gone as is. Why don't we actually talk about how we responded to COVID and living into our why of the goal of the podcast to share our culture with the world so we can help and inspire others. And so let's help inspire others, because the elephant in the room right now is COVID.
Obviously, everybody knows the year and month, but I was just about to fly down for us to record our very first episode of the podcast. And of course, basically flights are grounded. We can't go anywhere. We're in a place where everything suddenly becomes uncertain. And so the lesson that I think this episode brought us was not only just being agile, but having a clear vision and then making backup plans to the backup plans, right?
Yeah. I mean, we were supposed to launch the podcast in March of 2020. I think we ended up doing it in August. Is that right?
Yeah.
And things, change, stuff happens. And so when we were kind of rethinking the podcast, we're like, well, I think we need to talk about how COVID trashed the podcast and what it's been like inside of our brand. And, without spending too much time on this, when this happened, it was a shock to us. Our sales went to 0 overnight. Mm-hmm. We needed to figure out how we're going to operate as a business, and sat in a room, making contingency plans with our head of finance at the time. And I think we got all the way to I think we got all the way to contingency plan J or something. It was oh my God. It was contingency plan. If this happens, this, if this happens, this, if this happens, this. And we were just trying to plan for so many scenarios because we found ourselves in a completely unknown, we were in an unknown situation. And so we needed to account for everything. And it was, I don't know. I have not gone back and listened to the episode. I probably will not because, it's my own voice. But my guess is we were probably pretty energized and excited at that time. Do you remember recording the episode?
I do. Yeah. We're both in our closets. I think we'd set up some kind of sound, baffling system. It forced us to be able to figure out how to record remotely, which we're doing now, because, we were recording in person for a while, but we're working on the new podcast studio. So we're back to remote, but even that small thing allowed us to continue with this plan while we were talking about how we were making other plans for every possible scenario for the company itself.
Yeah. It was awesome. I mean, it's really wild to look at where we've come in the past 100 episodes. All right, so Sean, I was super quick here, but what do you want? Like, what do you want to have in the next 100 episodes?
The next 100 episodes. Oh my God. Well, obviously more dream guests. Let's meet some more of our heroes. I think if we can get some feedback from listeners on what they would like to hear, we can deliver on that, like make this even more practical, bite-sized chunks of things that can be helpful to people. And then just do our best to continue sharing what we learned in a way that's vulnerable and honest. So not only that others can follow in our footsteps, but we can have left a nice little record for our time on this earth.
Yeah. I mean, for me, excited for the studio to open in the next couple months. So we'll be back in person. That'll just be exciting. But overarchingly, we've done seasons before. I want to go back to contextually doing packaging up, like, oh, we're doing 8 episodes on this thing. And so really spending time to give our listeners what they want and make it really tactical and usable. And then also, I mean, for sure, surprise guest, but I would love to figure out a way to decentralize it and have more people inside the brand run the podcast and not just you and I.
Yeah, that'd be great as well. More voices in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Oh,
well, let's do
all right,
it.
my friend. This has been great. It was I mean, it's wild. I could actually just go back and talk about every episode like this. It's just really fun. So I'm grateful for our listeners for sticking with us.
Yeah, thanks everybody. And thank you, Stephen, for being an awesome co-host on this journey. Here's to 100 more.
Cheers, my friend.
All right. Until next time, y'all, be excellent to each other.